Today we will be reading the storybook Wizard of Oz. We will be starting with the first chapter, which is called The Cyclone. Think about what this chapter could possibly be about. This is the first chapter, so just think about what the cyclone could be about, beginning the story. Dorothy lived in the midst of the great Kansas prairies with Uncle Henry, who was a farmer, and Aunt Em, who was the farmer's wife. Their house was small, for the lumber to build it had to be carried by wagon many miles. There were 4 walls, a floor, and a roof, which made one room, and this room contained a rusty-looking cooking stove, a cupboard for the dishes, a table, 3 or 4 chairs, and the beds. Uncle Henry and Aunt Em had a big bed in one corner and Dorothy a little bed in the other corner. There was no garret at all, and no cellar, except a small hole dug in the ground, called a cyclone cellar, where the family could go in case one of those great whirlwinds arose, mighty enough to crush any building in its path. It was reached by a trap-door in the middle of the floor, from which a ladder led down into a small, dark hole. When Dorothy stood in the doorway and looked around, she could see nothing but the great gray prairie on every side. Not a tree nor a house broke the broad sweep of flat country that reached to the edge of the sky in all directions. The sun had baked the plot land into a gray mass, with little cracks running through it. Even the grass was not green, for the sun had burned the tops of the long blades until they were the same gray color to be seen everywhere. Once the house had been painted, but the sun blistered the paint and the rains washed it away, and now the house was dull and gray as everything else. When Aunt Em came there to live, she was young, pretty wife. The sun and the wind had changed her too. They had taken the sparkle from her eyes and left them a sober gray. They had taken the red from her cheeks and her lips, and they were gray also. She was thin and gaunt, and never smiled now. When Dorothy, who was an orphan, first came to her, Aunt Em had been so startled by the child's laughter that she would scream and press her hand upon her heart whenever Dorothy's merry voice reached her ears. And she still looked at the little girl with wonder that she could find anything to laugh at. Uncle Henry never laughed. He worked hard from morning till night and did not know what joy was. He was gray also. From this long beard to his rough boots, he looked stern and solemn and rarely spoke. It was Toto that made Dorothy laugh and saved her from growing as gray as her other surroundings. Toto was not gray. He was a little black dog with long silky hair and small black eyes that twinkled merrily on either side of his funny, wee nose. Toto played all day long, and Dorothy played with him and loved him dearly. Today, however, they were not playing. Uncle Henry sat upon the doorstep and looked anxiously at the sky, which was even grayer than usual. Dorothy stood at the door with Toto in her arms and looked at the sky too. Aunt Em was washing the dishes. From the far north they heard a low wail of the wind, and Uncle Henry and Dorothy could see where the long wind grass bowed in waves before the coming storm. There now came a sharp whistling in the air from the south, and as they turned their eyes the way they saw ripples in the grass coming from that direction also. Suddenly Uncle Henry stood up. "There's a cyclone coming, Em," he called to his wife. "I'll go look after the stock." Then he ran towards the sheds where the cows and horses were kept. Aunt Em dropped her work and came to the door. One glance told her of the danger close at hand. "Quickly, Dorothy," she screamed. "Run for the cellar!" Toto jumped out of Dorothy's arms and hid under the bed, and the girl started to get him. Aunt Em, badly frightened, threw open the trapdoor in the floor and climbed down to the ladder into a small, dark hole. Dorothy caught Toto at last and started to follow her aunt. When she was halfway across the room, there came a great shriek of wind, and the house shook so hard that she lost her footing and sat down suddenly upon the floor. A strange thing then happened. The house whirled around 2 or 3 times and rose slowly through the air. Dorothy felt as if she were going up in a balloon. The north and south winds met where the house stood, and they made it in the exact center of the cyclone. In the middle of the cyclone, the air is generally still, but the great pressure of the wind on every side of the house raised it up higher and higher until it was at the very top of the cyclone. And there it remained and was carried miles and miles away as easily as you could carry a feather. It was dark, and the wind howled horribly around her, but Dorothy found she was riding quite easily. After the first few whirls around, and one other time when the house tripped badly, she felt as if she were being rocked gently, like a baby in a cradle. Toto did not like it. He ran around the room, now here, now there, barking loudly. But Dorothy sat still on the floor and waited to see what would happen. Once Toto got too near to the open trapdoor and fell in. And at first the little girl thought she had lost him, but soon she saw that one of his ears sticking up through the hole, for the strong pressure of the air was keeping him up so that he could not fall. She crept to the hole, caught Toto by the ear, and dragged him into the room again, afterwards closing the trapdoor so there were no more accidents that could happen. Hour after passed away, and Dorothy got over her fright, but she quickly quite lonely, and she felt quite lonely, and the wind shrieked so loudly all about her that she nearly became deaf. At first she wondered if she could be dashed into pieces when the house fell again, but as the hours passed and nothing terrible happened, she stopped worrying and resolved to wait calmly and see what the future would bring. At last she crawled over the swaying floor to her bed and laid upon it, and Toto followed and laid beside her. In spite of swaying of the house and the wailing of the wind, Dorothy closed her eyes and fell fast asleep. Now, I want you to explain to me, what is the cyclone? Since this chapter was about the cyclone, what is the cyclone? And also, what do you think the gray symbolizes in this chapter? It said that the setting was gray and that the people turned gray. What do you think this gray symbolizes about this little town that they're in, or this house, or this environment? Enjoy!